What happens when the woman everyone mocked on a flight turns out to be the wife of the airline's owner and changes the lives of thousands forever? Mira was not the kind of woman who stood out in a crowd. She wore a simple white cotton sari, the kind that many elderly women in India wore during hot days. Her hair was neatly tied in a bun, and she carried an old handbag that looked like it had seen many years. Her sandals were flat, dusty, and clearly worn from years of use. There was nothing flashy about her. If you saw her on the street, you might think she was just a regular middle-class woman, maybe a retired teacher or someone's grandmother. And in many ways, she was just that kind, quiet, and very simple in her ways. That morning, Mira arrived at the large international airport. She had flown many times before, but it had been years since her last flight. Still, she walked calmly into the airport, dragging a small trolley bag behind her. People rushed past her, businessmen in suits talking loudly on phones, young travelers with backpacks, and glamorous women with expensive handbags. Mira looked at none of them. She simply walked to the information board, adjusted her glasses, and searched for her flight number. She spotted it. Flight 309 to London. Departure 11:45 a.m. Terminal 3. She looked around and started walking in that direction. It wasn't easy. The airport was modern, busy, and full of glass doors, metal escalators, and fast-moving carts. Mira moved slowly and carefully. At one point, she asked a young man in uniform where she should go. He glanced at her, looked at her sari and old sandals, and replied without much interest, pointing vaguely toward a corner, "Go that way, ma'am." Mira thanked him with a smile and went on. She never minded people being short with her. She believed everyone was just busy with their own life. When she reached the check-in area, she walked directly to the first-class counter. There was no line there. Most first-class passengers came in fancy cars, with assistants or airline staff helping them. But Mira came on her own, carrying her bag and ticket. She handed her passport and printed ticket to the lady behind the counter. The lady looked up at her, surprised. She checked the ticket again. It clearly said, "First class seat 1A." But she still asked politely, "Are you sure this is your ticket, ma'am?" Mira smiled and said gently, "Yes, Beta. My husband booked it for me." The lady nodded, stamped the ticket, and tagged the luggage. She handed Mira the boarding pass and said, "Enjoy your flight." Just behind Mira, a man in a crisp blue suit, who had been waiting at the business class counter, laughed quietly. He whispered to the woman next to him, "Did you see that? First class. Are they giving away those seats in lucky draws now?" The woman laughed too. Maybe she's going to London to visit her daughter's family. Who knows? She probably took all her savings to buy that ticket. They didn't know Mira could hear them, but she did. Still, she didn't react. She walked forward slowly, heading towards security check. At the security gate, she waited in the first-class line. Another group of passengers, mostly younger professionals in their 30s, noticed her again. One of them, a man with gelled hair and a laptop bag, whispered, "Is she lost?" Another one added, "Looks like she got confused and entered the wrong line." But no one said anything directly to Mira. A staff member checked her ticket, nodded, and let her through. She continued on her way, now entering the lounge area. It was quiet and luxurious inside. Soft music played in the background. Leather chairs, warm lighting, and coffee machines surrounded her. There were newspapers and magazines neatly arranged. Most passengers there were wearing branded clothes, reading business reports, or working on laptops. When Mira entered, a few heads turned. Some smiled politely, others just stared. She sat down on one of the corner couches. She took out a small packet of biscuits from her bag and munched on them, sipping water from a bottle she brought along. She looked around with interest, not judgment. Everything looked new and different to her, and she appreciated how clean and quiet the place was. Soon, one of the same young professionals from earlier walked by and noticed her again. He chuckled and said to his friend, "What do you think? Maybe she's here by mistake. Should we call someone?" His friend replied, "Nah, maybe it's one of those social service things, like they give first class to elders sometimes." They laughed softly. Mira heard them again. She didn't look at them, but her eyes showed a quiet understanding. She had seen people like this all her life. People who judged others by clothes, appearance, and age. A few minutes later, a lounge attendant walked up to Mira and politely asked, "Madam, would you like some tea or coffee?" Mira smiled. "Just tea, please. No sugar," the attendant brought her tea in fine porcelain. Mira held the warm cup in her wrinkled hands and sipped it slowly. She wasn't thinking about the people laughing at her. She was thinking about her destination. She was flying to London to attend a small ceremony where her late husband's name was going to be added to the list of great aviation pioneers. It was a private event, not open to the public. Only close family and selected airline staff were invited. Her husband, Rajan Kapoor, had passed away 5 years ago, but he had built the airline from nothing. And now, the airline was honoring his memory. Mira had kept away from the spotlight all her life. She never appeared in interviews or public events. Most people in the company didn't even know what she looked like. But Rajan always made sure that the airline respected her. And today, she was flying first class as the special guest of the company. But she didn't tell anyone that. She didn't think it was necessary. She believed that respect should come naturally, not be demanded. As she waited in the lounge, more passengers arrived. Some gave her puzzled looks. Others simply ignored her. The man in the blue suit walked past again, looked at her and shook his head slightly. "Unbelievable," he whispered to his companion. "They should at least have a dress code for this." "Lounge," his companion laughed. "Next thing you know, my mother-in-law will want to fly first class too." Mira continued to sit quietly, now reading a small book she had brought with her. It was a collection of poems by Rabindranath Tagore. Her husband had gifted it to her on their first anniversary. She turned the pages slowly, remembering him with every line around her. The world kept moving, screens announcing boarding calls, people rushing with bags, staff walking briskly in uniforms. But Mira remained calm. Nothing could disturb her. Peace. She had seen life's ups and downs. She had supported her husband when he had no money and only a dream. She had lived through times when they barely had food for the family. She had raised their children with strong values, teaching them kindness and humility. And even when the business grew and the money came, Mira never changed. She still wore the same simple saris, cooked her own meals, and lived in the same small bungalow they had built long ago. Time passed, and soon, the boarding call was announced for first-class passengers. Mira stood up, adjusted her sari, picked up her bag, and walked toward the gate. The same people who had laughed at her earlier were now standing in line behind her, watching silently as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent. The staff member smiled widely and said, "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Kapoor." Several heads turned. Some of the laughing passengers exchanged glances, confused by what they had just heard. Mira walked down the jet bridge slowly, her back straight, her steps steady. She wasn't in a hurry. She had waited her whole life for this flight, not for the comfort of first class, but for the quiet respect it carried. She didn't need to explain who she was. The journey had just begun. The moment Mira stepped into the aircraft, a quiet respect filled the air around her. The flight attendant standing at the door greeted her with a gentle smile and a warm welcome. "Mrs. Kapoor, we're honored to have you with us today." Mira gave a soft smile in return, nodding in acknowledgement as she walked down the aisle of the first-class cabin. Passengers already seated looked up at her. Some only gave a passing glance, but a few pairs of eyes lingered on her a bit longer. Those who had seen her earlier in the lounge and made cruel assumptions were now more alert, watching her every move, as if silently asking themselves, who is she really? Seat 1A was located right at the front, spacious, luxurious, with a personal cabin-like design. It had a large recliner, a private entertainment system, sliding door for privacy, and a menu that offered everything from international meals to herbal teas. Mira gently placed her handbag beside her seat and sat down. The softness of the seat surprised her. She leaned back, slowly removing her glasses and placing them on the side table. A flight attendant immediately came to her. "Would you like a hot towel, ma'am? Or perhaps a drink before takeoff?" Mira smiled. "Just some warm water, Beta. That will be fine." He nodded and walked away quickly. Behind her, she could hear the light rustle of newspapers. the beeping of seatbelt signs, some whispers among passengers, especially from those who had noticed the attention Mira was receiving. The woman from the lounge, dressed in the black, formal outfit, was now seated 2 rows behind Mira. She watched everything: how the flight crew bowed slightly every time they passed Mira's seat, how the senior pilot himself walked over just before takeoff to check on her and greet her. "Once more," he said softly, "we'll have a smooth journey today, Mrs. Kapoor. And once we're airborne, please let me know if there's anything you need." The woman's jaw dropped slightly. The man beside her whispered, "This is definitely the owner's wife. We've been absolute fools." Mira heard it, but again, she didn't turn. Her silence was her dignity. She had spent most of her life listening to people who only valued appearance, title, and wealth. But she also knew that in time, the truth always revealed itself gently, powerfully. Without needing to shout as the flight took off, Mira closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Flying always reminded her of Rajan, her husband, who had dreamt of owning airplanes when they couldn't even afford a scooter. She remembered the early days of their marriage, and they lived in a small rented house, and he would come home with new ideas, new dreams, and eyes full of hope. Wanted to start something of his own. While others laughed at him for thinking big, Mira stood by him, not because she understood business, but because she believed in his heart. Years of struggle followed. Rajan took small jobs, saved every rupee, borrowed from friends, worked long nights. Mira managed the home, raised their children, and made every rupee stretch. When Rajan finally launched his small airline with just 2 planes, Mira was the one who made sure everything was in order behind the scenes, paying salaries on time, making food for the staff during tough days, even cleaning the office in the early days when they couldn't afford cleaning staff. Now, that small airline had grown into one of the biggest names in international travel. But Mira never changed. She still wore the same kind of sari, still cooked her own meals, and still lived in the same old house, even though she had the option to move into a fancy bungalow. Her simplicity was her strength, and she carried it with quiet pride. A soft chime brought Mira back to the present. The seatbelt sign turned off. Passengers began adjusting their seats, pulling out laptops or watching movies. Mira took out her book again, the same one she had been reading in the lounge. It was now worn at the edges, but each page held memories. As she read quietly, a young flight attendant came by again. "Mrs. Kapoor," she said respectfully, "may I serve you lunch now, or would you prefer to rest first?" "Yeah." Mira smiled gently. "Whenever it's convenient, Beta. I'm in no rush." The attendant bowed slightly and left to prepare the tray. The man in the business suit, sitting diagonally across from her, couldn't stop glancing at her. He had been one of the loudest in the lounge, mocking her appearance. Now he looked uncomfortable. His posture had changed, less proud, more stiff. He leaned toward his colleague and said in a low voice, "I don't know how to face her now. We said such horrible things." His friend nodded. "You misjudged her badly. All because of her sari and slippers." Their quiet guilt floated through the cabin. Mira didn't look at them. She had no interest in punishing or teaching them a lesson. Their own conscience was already doing the job. Lunch arrived. The tray was neatly arranged silverware, china plates, a bowl of soup, bread rolls, rice, dal, and a small dessert. Aroma reminded Mira of home. She ate slowly, appreciating the flavors. She remembered how Rajan used to tease her for always packing homemade food, even during long journeys. "We can afford to eat out now, Mira," he would say. She would laugh and say, "I cook with love. Money doesn't add flavor." After the meal, Mira pulled out a small photograph from her bag. It was a faded picture of Rajan, wearing a suit, standing next to an airplane. She looked at it for a long time, her eyes softening. This trip was not just a journey, it was a tribute. The airline was hosting a small event in London to honor Rajan Kapoor's contribution to aviation. They were naming a new training center after him. Mira had been invited as the guest of honor. She had said yes, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she knew Rajan would have wanted her to be there. Hours passed. The flight continued smoothly. Some passengers slept, some worked, some watched movies. The cabin remained peaceful. Mira rested for a while too. The seat reclined fully into a bed, and the warm blanket made her feel at home. When she awoke, it was already dark outside. The stars looked like tiny pinholes in the sky, and the moonlight touched the airplane's wing with a soft glow. She sat up, sipped water, and noticed the same woman from earlier approaching her seat. Hesitantly, it was the one who had mocked her in the lounge. "Excuse me, ma'am," the woman said softly. I just wanted to say something." Mira looked up, her eyes calm and kind. "Yes, Beta." The woman swallowed her pride. "Very sorry for what I said earlier in the lounge. I didn't know who you were, and I judged you unfairly." Mira looked at her for a moment, then smiled gently. "It's okay, dear. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we realize them." The woman looked relieved, almost tearful. "Thank you, ma'am. You're very kind." Mira nodded. "Be kind to others, too. Sometimes people carry stories you cannot see." The woman nodded and quietly walked back to her seat. Her steps were slower now, her attitude softer. The rest of the flight went by quietly. As the plane neared London, the captain made an announcement about the weather and the landing time. Then he added, "We are also honored to be carrying a very special passenger today, Mrs. Mira Kapoor, wife of our late founder, Mr. Rajan Kapoor. This flight is in his memory." Passengers looked up from their screens and books. There was a moment of silence, followed by respectful applause. Mira sat still, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes closed for a brief moment. She didn't need attention. But the tribute warmed her heart. As the plane touched down and slowly came to a stop at the terminal, Mira felt a quiet satisfaction inside, not because of the luxury or the first-class service, but because she had carried Rajan's legacy with grace and honesty. Had stayed true to herself. One by one, passengers began to gather their bags and leave the aircraft. Mira seated some to smile, some to bow slightly, some to just nod in silent respect. The group of three who had mocked her earlier said nothing. Their silence was apology enough. Mira understood. When she finally stepped out of the aircraft and into the waiting car sent by the airline, the staff saluted her with folded hands. She smiled, nodded, and sat back in the car seat. The driver said respectfully, "Welcome to London, ma'am. Everyone's waiting to meet you." Mira looked out at the city slowly passing by the window. It didn't matter where she was, in a crowded Indian street or a grand foreign airport. Her simplicity, her dignity, and her quiet strength traveled. With her like invisible armor, those who had laughed before would remember this journey forever, because she proved them wrong, and because she showed them what true grace looks like. Inside the first-class lounge, the world looked completely different from the noisy airport outside. It was quiet, peaceful, and filled with soft lights, clean air, and a kind of silence that made people speak in low voices. Expensive leather. Chairs were placed all around, some near glass walls that showed a view of airplanes slowly moving on the runway. There were tables filled with snacks, imported cheese, dry fruits, small sandwiches, and sweets that looked like they came from five-star hotels. Waiters moved around quietly, carrying trays of drinks and coffee. Mira entered the lounge slowly, looking around with gentle curiosity. It was not the kind of place she visited often. Everything looked polished, shiny, and fancy. She didn't feel nervous, but she did feel a little out of place. Her cotton sari, plain sandals, and simple handbag made her look different from everyone else there. Most of the people were dressed in expensive clothes suits, designer dresses, branded watches. She noticed a young woman wearing sunglasses indoors, talking on the phone loudly in English about a business deal. Two men nearby were discussing share markets and laughing at some inside joke. She found an empty chair in the corner, near a plant and a small coffee table. She sat down carefully, placing her handbag on her lap. From her bag, she pulled out a small cotton handkerchief, wiped her hands, and looked around. A young waiter came by and asked politely, "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" Mira smiled and replied softly, "Just tea, Beta. No sugar." The waiter nodded and walked away. Mira leaned back into the chair, her eyes slowly moving around the lounge, observing everything with interest. Her husband had once described these places to her, but she had never taken the time to sit in one herself. Meanwhile, a group of 3 people sitting a few chairs away from her started whispering. One of them, a young woman in her 30s with a smart black dress and shiny shoes, looked at Mira and then at her 2 friends. "Did she walk into the wrong lounge?" she asked quietly. The man sitting with her laughed. "Maybe she followed someone in by mistake. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs here?" The third one, a woman with too much makeup and a heavy gold necklace, added, "Exactly. Probably came in with an economy class ticket and somehow tricked the staff. They really need to check more carefully." Mira didn't react. She could hear them clearly, but she kept her eyes on the magazine rack across the lounge. She had heard whispers like this before, at weddings, in markets, even at hospitals. People often judged by clothes, age, and face. But Mira had learned long ago that silence was often stronger than argument. The waiter returned with a tray. On it was a white porcelain cup filled with tea and a small saucer of biscuits. He placed it gently on the table in front of her and bowed slightly. "Enjoy your tea, ma'am." Mira thanked him kindly. The group nearby went silent for a moment, watching the respectful way the waiter treated her. But then the young man laughed again and said, "Maybe she's someone important in disguise. Like in those movies where millionaires test how people treat them." His friend shook her head. "Or maybe she's just a confused old lady who got lucky." Mira picked up her tea and sipped it slowly. It was hot and comforting. The biscuits were soft and buttery. She thought about how proud her husband would have been to see her here today. He always told her she deserved more respect, more attention, more space in the world. But she had always stayed behind the scenes, supporting him quietly. Now, as she sat in that chair, drinking her tea, she remembered his words clearly. "Mira, you don't need a title or fancy clothes. Your dignity is in your simplicity." More people entered the lounge as the boarding time came closer. Some glanced at Mira briefly, others ignored her completely. But one woman, dressed in a sharp navy blue uniform, noticed her from across the room. She walked over and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Kapoor, welcome. We're honored to have you flying with us today." Mira smiled politely. "Thank you, dear. I'm fine here." The staff member nodded. "If you need anything, please let me know. Everyone has been informed of your presence." Those words were not spoken loudly, but the nearby group heard them. The smartly dressed woman raised her eyebrows. "Did she just say Kapoor?" she whispered. The man beside her blinked. "Wait. Kapoor as in Rajan Kapoor, the founder." The other woman looked uncomfortable. "Maybe it's just a common name. That doesn't mean she's related." But doubt had entered their minds now. They started whispering even more quietly, trying to remember what Rajan Kapoor's wife looked like. There were very few photos of her in the news. She had always kept herself away from cameras. A short while later, a flight captain in full uniform entered the lounge. He was tall, confident, and clearly senior. Looked around, walked past the young professionals, and straight to Mira. "Madam Mira," he said with respect, "I'm honored to welcome you today. Captain Verma, I will be flying you to London this morning." Mira stood up slowly and folded her hands politely. "Namaste, Captain. It's a pleasure." Captain smiled. "If there's anything you need during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask." The group nearby was now staring in open shock. One of them dropped her spoon into her coffee. The captain of the flight had personally greeted the simple old woman they were mocking just minutes ago. No other passenger received such treatment. "Okay, this is something," whispered the man in the suit. "She's definitely not just another passenger." The smartly dressed woman leaned forward and said softly, "What if she really is?" They all fell silent, not wanting to say more. A kind of guilt slowly crept into their minds. They remembered everything they had said earlier, every rude joke, every insult, every judgment they passed just by looking at her clothes. Mira sat down again. She didn't look at the group, but she could feel their confusion, their embarrassment. She didn't need to say anything. Her calmness spoke louder than words. Soon, boarding announcements began to play over the speakers. Passengers gathered their bags and prepared to leave the lounge. The group of three stood up as well, but their mood had completely changed. They no longer looked proud or amused. Instead, they looked unsure, quiet, slightly ashamed. As Mira slowly walked toward the boarding gate, the three watched her carefully. One of the women said, "We shouldn't have said all that. What if she heard us?" The man nodded slowly. "She did. I think she did. But she didn't say a word." The third added, "That's worse. That makes me feel more guilty." They stood in line behind her, this time not with laughter or jokes, but with silence. Each of them was thinking the same thing: how wrong they had been, and how easily they had judged someone without knowing her story. Mira walked ahead, her back straight, her steps calm. She didn't need to turn around. She knew people often saw only what their eyes wanted to see, but life had taught her to see with the heart. And now, she was on her way to a destination that was not just another city, it was a journey of quiet dignity, unseen strength, and the kind of grace that doesn't need a spotlight to shine. When Mira stepped out of the airport into the soft London sunlight, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cleaned roads. She had traveled across the world, but her heart was still carrying the warmth of her home, of Roshan's memories, of the small house where their dreams had started. She didn't let the busy foreign city overwhelm her. She simply stood there for a moment, her eyes slowly taking in the foreign buildings, moving cars, and the neat line of people waiting for their rides. Her sari swayed gently in the breeze, and her hand clutched her simple purse as always. A young Indian man in a neat black suit came forward, bowing slightly. "Mom, stay, ma'am. I'm Ramesh from Kapoor Airlines London branch. I'm here to escort you." Mira gave him a small nod and smile. "Thank you, Beta." He took her bag with quiet respect and led her to a sleek black car waiting nearby. As she stepped inside, she noticed the comfort and class of the vehicle, but as always, she didn't look impressed or surprised. She just folded her hands in her lap and looked out of the window, watching the world pass by. Her eyes moved over the tall buildings, glass offices, and clean pavements, but her mind was somewhere else. Inside the car, Ramesh looked into the rearview mirror and spoke with admiration. "We've all heard so much about you, ma'am. Our team in London has been preparing for your visit for weeks." Mira looked at him kindly. "I hope I haven't caused too much trouble." "No trouble at all, ma'am," he smiled. "In fact, we feel honored. Everyone's excited for the inauguration ceremony tomorrow. The new training center's beautiful. It's being named the Rajan Kapoor Aviation Academy." Mira's fingers tightened gently around her bag. Her husband's name on a building in a land far from home, it filled her with a strange emotion. She wasn't sure if it was pride or pain. Maybe both. The drive took nearly 40 minutes. The car finally pulled into a beautiful 5-star hotel in the heart of the city. The grand building stood tall with polished glass windows, golden revolving doors, and a long red carpet at the entrance. A line of hotel staff stood outside waiting. The manager himself rushed forward to greet her. "Mrs. Kapoor, welcome to London. We're deeply honored to have you here," he said, folding his hands respectfully. Mira smiled gently and replied, "Thank you, but please don't treat me like a queen. I'm just Rojan's wife. That's enough for me." The manager smiled back, clearly touched by her humility. "That's exactly why you deserve this respect, ma'am." She was shown to a large suite on the top floor. The room was beautifully decorated plush carpets, wide windows showing the skyline of London, a sitting area with soft sofas, and a bedroom that looked like something out of a movie. There were fresh flowers, a welcome card, and a small framed photo of Raja on the bedside table. Mira walked slowly around the room, not touching anything at first. Her eyes paused at the photo of Raja. She sat down near it, picked it up, and softly said, "You've come so far, Raja, and I've come all this way to see it." That evening, she had a quiet dinner in her room. The hotel had offered a wide variety of dishes: pasta, grilled vegetables, soups, but she had requested something simple: plain dal, rice, and a little ghee. When the food arrived, the aroma reminded her of home. She ate slowly, remembering the way Rajan used to tease her about always eating the same thing, no matter how many options there were. After dinner, She opened her suitcase and pulled out a small wooden box wrapped in cloth. Inside it were a few items she always carried: Rogan's watch, a tiny diary where he had written dreams in broken handwriting, and a thin gold chain he had given her after their first wedding anniversary. She placed the items carefully on the side table. For a few moments, she just sat there, quietly remembering the life they had lived together. The next morning was bright and cheerful. The sun shone gently through the windows, and a team from the airline arrived to take Mira to the ceremony. She dressed in her usual simple, stylish cream-colored cotton sari with a light border, a small bindi on her forehead, and her hair neatly tied in a bun. There was no makeup, no expensive jewelry, just the glow of calm dignity on her face as she stepped into the car again. She noticed how serious and respectful the team members looked. They all stood up straight, folded their hands, and said, "Good morning, ma'am," with voices full of respect. One of them, a young woman named Rena, whispered to her colleague, "She's nothing like what we expected. She's so real." The event venue was large and beautiful, a new building built on open land with glass walls, training rooms, classrooms for pilots and staff, and a huge entrance gate with the words Rajan Kapoor, Aviation Academy, carved in gold. A big crowd had gathered: employees, managers, guests from the aviation industry, and journalists. Some of them had seen photos of Rajan Kapoor, but most had never seen his wife. Today everyone was curious to meet the woman who had stood beside him from the beginning. When Mira arrived, cameras began flashing, people stood up. The CEO of Kapoor Airlines London came forward to welcome her. "Mrs. Kapoor, this building stands today because of your husband's dream and your strength." Mira simply folded her hands and said, "Thank you, but dreams grow only when someone waters them every day. Rajan watered this dream with his blood and sweat. I only gave it shade." It was a moment of deep silence. Her words were simple, but they touched everyone deeply. A short tour of the building began. Mira walked slowly, taking her time to see everything. The classrooms had names like Vision Room, Courage Chamber, and Hope Hall, all inspired by Rajan's values. The wall in the main lobby displayed a large portrait of Rajan with his famous quote, "An idea needs only one believer." Finally, the moment of inauguration arrived. A red ribbon had been placed at the main gate of the academy. A small stage stood nearby where the CEO, a few other speakers, and Mira would say a few words. As Mira stood holding the scissors, she thought about the first time Rajan had spoken about starting a flight school. They didn't even have steady electricity in their home back then, but he had said, "One day pilots will learn under my name," and now that day had come. She cut the ribbon. Applause broke out. The academy was officially open. Mira was invited to speak. She walked up to the microphone slowly. The media stood ready, cameras pointed at her, notebooks open. She began softly, "I am not used to speaking in public. My husband used to do that. I was always the one sitting in the audience, listening. But today, I want to tell you something not about success, but about support. Behind every big dream, there are many small sacrifices. Rajan had the dream. I simply stayed beside him." She paused. "When we started, we didn't have much. Some days, we couldn't even afford vegetables. But Rajan always believed. He worked hard, fell many times, but stood up again. And I believed in him. It was my only job." Her voice trembled slightly, but she held it together. "People often ask me why I still wear cotton saris, why I don't use our wealth. I tell them this simplicity is my crown, because Rajan never saw value in gold. He saw value in people, in dreams, in honesty." Tears welled up in many eyes in the audience. Even the journalists paused, forgetting their cameras for a moment. Mira finished with one line that stayed with everyone. "You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes quiet support is the strongest pillar." The audience gave her a standing ovation. After the event, many people came forward to meet her. Young pilots, staff members, and even the local mayor shook her hand. Mira didn't carry herself like a celebrity. She greeted everyone with folded hands, thanking them, listening with patience. One young woman came forward, nervous and shy. She said, "Ma'am, I want to become a pilot one day, but people say girls from small towns can't do it. Mira smiled and touched her shoulder gently. Beta, the sky doesn't ask where you come from. It only asks if you're brave enough to fly. The girl would never forget those words. By the time Mira returned to her hotel, the sun was setting. The event had been a success. Her husband's dream had found a permanent place in the world. But Mira wasn't thinking about the applause or the media headlines. She was sitting by the window, sipping her tea, thinking about how far love and belief could carry someone. She didn't check the news. She didn't care about praise. She just sat with her memories, holding Rajan's photo in her lap, whispering, "We did it, Rajan. We did it together." Mira sat quietly on the flight back to India. The journey from London had been long, and the grand inauguration still echoed in her thoughts. She had stood in a foreign land, honored and respected, but none of it made her heart feel as heavy as it did now. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was something deeper. It was the feeling of coming full circle. Rajan's dream had come alive in a way he could never see with his own eyes. But Mira had seen it. Now she was going home, not to a house made of walls and windows, but to a memory stitched together by time, love, and simple living. The plane touched down in Delhi early in the morning. The sky was still painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air felt warmer than London's. A car waited to take her back to her small home. Yes, she still lived there. Despite all the wealth, she had refused to move out. That tiny house carried the scent of her early married days. The sound of Rajan's old jokes, in the corner where he had scribbled aviation plans on newspapers. When the car stopped in front of her gate, her neighbors gathered like always. Kids ran to help carry her bags, uncles and aunties greeted her warmly. And her close friend Ronnie came forward with tears in her eyes. "London was good?" Ronnie asked. Mira nodded. Yes, it was beautiful, but not as beautiful as home. That evening, Mira sat in her usual spot on the veranda, sipping her tea. The walls around her had cracks. The fan made a small noise when it turned. And the furniture was old, but her heart felt settled. She looked at the old photo of Rajan hanging on the wall and whispered, "I told you I'd do it. I took your dream to the world." In the following days, the news about her London visit spread everywhere. Newspapers carried her speech. Videos of the event went viral on social media. People from different cities and even villages were deeply moved by her words. But one story touched people more than anything, the story of how she had been laughed at by passengers on a flight just because she looked simple, and how later those same people realized she was the wife of the airline's owner. That story became a symbol, especially for people from humble backgrounds. News channels ran shows titled "The Power of Simplicity," Mira Kapoor's journey. Students discussed her speech in schools. Pilots hung her photo in their lockers for inspiration. Across the country, women looked at her and saw a reflection of themselves, not a glamorous, unreachable figure, but a woman who rose through life while remaining true to her roots. One day, a young man named Ravi arrived at her home. He was a journalist who had watched the video of her London speech many times. "Ma'am," said nervously, "I've written a book about your journey. It's not published yet, but I wanted your blessing." Mira was surprised. "A book? About me?" Ravi smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Not just about you, but about people like you who never change with power, who prove that strength doesn't need to shout." She read the first few pages slowly. Every line felt like a piece of her life being held with care. She looked up and said softly, "Ravi, Beta, if this book helps even one person believe in themselves, then it's worth it." A few weeks later, the book was published. It was titled "The Quiet Strength," and it became a bestseller. Readers across the country connected with Mira's journey. Schools started including chapters from it in value education classes. Interviews poured in, but Mira rarely gave any. She didn't like too much attention. She still preferred her quiet afternoons with tea and old memories. Meanwhile, Kapoor Airlines started a new scholarship under her name, the Mira Kapoor Scholarship for girls who wanted to become pilots or airline professionals. The scholarship announcement went viral too. Thousands of applications came from small towns and villages. Mira personally requested the board to keep the selection based not just on marks, but also on dreams. If a girl can dream big while cooking on a chula or studying under a street lamp, she's already halfway there. She said during a board meeting, many employees who once didn't know her now carried deep respect for her. One of them was Rena, the flight attendant from the day Mira had been laughed at in the plane. Rena had felt ashamed for staying quiet that day. She had watched Mira's speeches and interviews and decided to write her a heartfelt letter. Let her read, "Dear Mrs. Kapoor, you may not remember me, but I remember you every single day. I was the flight attendant on that journey where some people mocked your simplicity. I stood silent. I regret that deeply. Your grace, your calmness, and your strength taught me more than any training ever could. Thank you for showing us that dignity doesn't wear brands, it wears honesty. Mira." Rena. Mira read the letter and smiled. She didn't hold grudges. She simply called Kapoor Airlines and requested a meeting with Rena. When they met, Rena stood nervously in front of her, unsure of what to say. Mira gently held her hand and said, "It's never too late to learn, Beta, and you've learned something important. That's all that matters." Rena broke down in tears, not because she was scolded, but because she was forgiven. Years passed. Mira grew older, but her presence only became more powerful. She never moved to a bungalow. She never wore diamonds, but she wore peace on her face like a rare jewel. She didn't own luxury cars, but she owned respect in every corner of the company her husband had built. People visited her not to flatter her, but to learn from her. One day, Kapoor Airlines planned a grand event in Mumbai to celebrate 50 years since its foundation. They sent her a formal invitation, along with a first-class ticket and hotel bookings. But Mira sent a simple message back. "I will attend. Please don't send any ticket. I'll come like I always do, in economy class with my heart full." And she did. She traveled just as she had before. When she arrived at the event, everyone stood to greet her. Senior pilots, engineers, CEOs, and even ministers waited to shake her hand. A video montage played at the event, showed old pictures of Rajan and Mira, the early days of Kapoor Airlines, the struggles, the achievements. The last frame was a photo of Mira sitting on her veranda. Holding Rajan's photo in her lap, everyone stood to applaud her, but Mira only smiled humbly. When she was asked to say a few words, she spoke what she always did. "We never had plans to become great, we just wanted to be good. Rajan had the dream, and I had the faith. Together, that was enough. If your dreams are big, but your heart is kind, the world will find a place for you. And even if it doesn't, your soul will still be at peace." The entire hall went silent for a few seconds, then applause filled the room. After the event, a young girl from a small village walked up to her. "Ma'am," she said with tears in her eyes, "I got the Mira Kapoor scholarship. I'm going to be a pilot. My parents are farmers. But you made me believe it's possible." Mira looked at her and said, "The sky is open to everyone. You just have to spread your wings." As the event ended, Mira returned home once again. The media called her a legend, a symbol of simplicity, a national inspiration. But to herself, she was still the same girl who once saved coins to buy vegetables. The same woman who sat beside her husband's dreams every night. Years later, when Mira passed away peacefully in her sleep, the country mourned. Kapoor Airlines grounded all flights for 1 hour in her memory. Every pilot wore a black ribbon. Thousands attended her funeral not because she was famous, but because she was real. On her grave, they wrote a simple line. She never needed wings to fly. Her faith carried her beyond the clouds. And somewhere in the skies above the hum of the planes, her spirit still flew quiet, graceful, and forever strong.